Greetings, all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another retrospective video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 1980s horror anthology series, Tales from the Darkside. The series ran from 1983 to 1988 with a total of 90 episodes. The series was originally created by George Romero, who of course at that time had just come off a beloved horror anthology movie, Creepshow, which is one of my all-time favorite films. Of course, being based on the Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror EC horror comics of the 1950s. Tales from the Darkside was originally supposed to be Creepshow the series. However, there was a bit of a rights issue with the Creepshow name. The production company behind Tales from the Darkside were not able to use the actual name Creepshow, so they came up with the name of Tales from the Darkside. This series was actually the one that first introduced me to horror anthology shows. Of course, I was not born when this show was originally on, but here in the UK, this show used to air on a channel called Horror Channel, which has since become something else. They used to air reruns of Tales from the Darkside pretty much all the time. It was the perfect way to be introduced to it and enjoy it. And I just remember thinking that it was so cool and creepy and different. Now, I love that each episode was something different each time. And I was sort of somewhat familiar with stuff like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits, but I'd never really watched them, so Tales from the Darkside was really my personal introduction to the world of anthology shows, which of course I have since become a big fan of. Now, I am kind of looking at the show with somewhat slightly rose-colored glasses here, but I have, gone back and watched most of the series recently, and I have to say that I do think that most of it does still hold up, with a couple episodes here and there not quite being up to par. But that's pretty much almost every horror anthology show, or any anthology show in general, because you're never going to be able to hit it out of the park 100% every time, because, you're doing something different every time. Whilst every episode is something different, there are a couple of things that kind of stand out as being, you could recognize it as a Tales from the Darkside episode. One of the things that's really interesting about this show is that the producers actually were prepared for the show being very low budget. And so when you watch the series, you're really going to notice two things. You're going to notice that each episode only has a certain amount of actors. I would say normally there's maybe 2 or 3 actors in an episode total, maybe like 4 or 5 at most, but most of the time it's probably 2 or 3. There were a couple occasions where there were more than that, but there's even some episodes, very few, where there's literally only one person, or a lot of times only 2 people. Therefore, of course, them being able to keep the budget down by not hiring so many actors. And the other thing that you're going to notice when watching this series is that every single episode only takes place in 1 or 2 locations. It's very, very rare, if ever, in the series that they actually venture into a third location. Those are really the 2 ways that they were able to kind of save money by hiring, very little actors and very little sets. But what was great about this, and the reason why, what to me is probably the greatest thing about Tales from the Darkside, that honestly I've always thought was really great and kind of genius, was the fact that all the stories themselves are written that way. They are written to only take place in 1 or 2 locations with only 1 or 2 characters. And so that they really played into sort of the low budget. They were aware of their limitations. They knew they didn't have a lot of money, a lot of time, and so they sort of constructed the stories in a way that would kind of fit in that realm, that were actually possible for them to do. In a way that also kind of gives Tales from the Darkside a certain identity, because that there's only going to be a certain amount of characters, it's probably only going to take place in 1 or 2 locations, and so because of that, it sort of gave the show this particular identity with the look and the stories. And the look itself, of course, is very, the series is not in the best of quality, because it was one of those shows that, being as low budget as it was, and this being in the 1980s, it was, shot and mastered on video and everything, which basically means that when you watch it on DVD or whatever, that's the best it's ever going to look. And so for me, growing up watching this series, it was kind of like it had this old kind of grimy, kind of macabre feel to it. And it sort of, to me, and I know this might sound strange, but to me it sort of, and with a lot of other shows around this time, it sort of gave them kind of an otherworldly factor, with like the fashion sense and, the sort of the old school retro music, as well as the old school kind of look to it. to me, that was kind of what made this show appealing to me, that made me want to watch it, that made me interested in it. So that was just, just something personal that made me, that drew me to the show personally, and it made me want to keep watching. That was a really, really smart idea of them to kind of, make sure to construct all their stories in that way. Because if you look at, some other horror anthology shows around that same time, particularly Freddy's Nightmares, the Nightmare on Elm Street spin-off series, that was an anthology series. That show, I believe, was probably around the same budget, but that was not managed as well, and you can really kind of tell when watching it. So I think that was one of the great things about the show, is that they used the sort of low budget to their advantage. The stories themselves would range all kinds of different things. Again, some episodes would deal with some kind of a monster, other episodes would just, very, very Twilight Zone-esque, and then there would be some kind of strange episodes that weren't really horror or sci-fi. They were just kind of, weird. But there's lots of episodes with sort of inanimate objects sort of coming to life. For instance, there's an episode about, a phone, literally a killer phone, and there's an episode where someone's answering machine comes to life, and so there's lots of episodes like that. So sort of the range of sort of cheesiness kind of ranges from when you're watching. There's some episodes that are really serious that work really well, and then there's other episodes that are really cheesy and really ridiculous and you want to forget and never want to watch again. It really depends on what you personally are looking for, and this is the same that it goes for with every horror anthology series, is that if depending on what kind of stories that you personally enjoy or prefer, is going to depend on what your overall enjoyment and thoughts are on the series overall. So me personally, just being a generalized genre fan and horror anthology fan, to me, I do think that this is one of the best horror anthology shows that we've ever had. I wouldn't say it's up to the best of, the Twilight Zone or the Outer Limits or perhaps Tales from the Crypt, but I do think that it is a legitimately great series. There was actually also Tales from the Darkside, the movie, yes, which is from, the same production company, the same producers, and a lot of the same people working on it. And Tales from the Darkside, the movie, was basically supposed to be Creepshow free originally, but at that time they kind of decided that the Tales from the Darkside name would perhaps maybe be more marketable than the Creepshow name, and I think there was again issues with the Creepshow name. So yeah, it was about 2 or 3 years after Tales from the Darkside ended, we got Tales from the Darkside the movie. And if you are a fan of the Creepshow films, Tales from the Darkside the movie is definitely worth a watch. It's a great film. There's not really anything really, I would say, that really properly resembles it to the series, other than kind of the more or less kind of generalized style and tone of the stories. But perhaps it's one that I will save and talk about more in depth another time, but it's definitely worth checking out. Now, in terms of the show's availability, it is available in a complete series DVD set, which of course has been released a couple of times. It was released originally in 2010 in this version, and then it is now currently available in this sort of more condensed packaging in the US. So if you're looking to get the series, your best bet is to get this set. Now, of course, me being in Region 2 land, we got our own set, which I've had for several years now. And it's a great set. The bit rate's really nice and everything. The packaging is pretty nice, and it's more or less kind of similar to the Epic pack that I previously mentioned. The only difference being that the show is spread out over more discs, so you might find that just a little bit better bit rate on this collection. Alright guys, that is it for this retrospective video. Thanks for watching, be sure to subscribe for more videos, and until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.